SpaceX is planning to launch a lot more in the coming years, and with SpaceX, what goes up usually comes back down, so they're going to need to land more. That is often ignored, but there's some news coming out about landing sites and how they're going to coordinate East Coast, West Coast launches and landings. I want to talk about Project Liftoff, which is something I have not seen a lot of information about. That is the code name that was given to the expansion of landing sites at Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral area by Space Florida. Space Florida is a quasi-government entity run by the state of Florida, and their job is economic development in the arena of space. I've worked quite a bit with Space Florida in the past. I'm the executive director of space consulting firm Astrolytical. I have personally worked on 3 spaceport projects, so I know that there's a lot that goes into spaceport creation and expansion. And here we're talking about landings here.
EY-NY landing light deploy.
Our monitor's shaking as we watch
amazing.
these 2
That is
boosters
just
land.
awesome.
That's what Project Liftoff is about. It is about adding 3 additional landing sites to Florida's Space Coast. Right now, Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2 are at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Presumably, this would be about Landing Zone 3, 4, and 5. There is not a ton of information out there. This news article from Florida Today, which I will link below, came after a meeting yesterday from Space Florida's Board of Directors. Those meeting minutes are publicly available, but the meeting minutes haven't been posted yet, so I'm going by the agenda here, and I'm going to read to you what the agenda says about Project Liftoff. Management requests approval for authority to negotiate and enter agreements, 1 with Florida Department of Transportation in the amount of $13,322,500 and with SpaceX in the amount of up to $13,322,500 for the funding and construction of Cape Canaveral Spaceport Landing Zone and pad resilience enhancements at Complex 39A and 40. This is a cost-sharing agreement between Florida Department of Transportation and SpaceX to not only build these additional landing sites at Cape Canaveral, but also to do enhancements to their current pads. Now, this is separate from the environmental impact statement that is going on by the FAA right now. I broke that down in detail in this video above, which I highly recommend you watch because I broke down a lot of the troublesome and somewhat hilarious things that were brought up by United Launch Alliance and by Blue Origin to try to prevent expansion of SpaceX in the Space Coast. So go ahead and watch that after this video. So this is a separate thing. This is about ensuring that once SpaceX does have the authority to do more launches out of Cape Canaveral, and I'm defining Cape Canaveral here as both Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Kennedy Space Center. Once they launch more, they want to be able to land more. So right now they've got those 2 landing zones. They also have 2 barges in the Atlantic Ocean that they also land on. That is literally all the information I can find about Project Liftoff. I would love to know if you know more about this under a different name. Presumably we should be getting the meeting minutes posted soon from Space Florida, and hopefully more information will be coming about these landing zones and pad enhancements in the future. Now the pad enhancements, there is a little bit more information in the Florida Today article. They say it is for resiliency enhancements such as corrosion protection, structural improvement, fire protection upgrades, and environmental mitigation, and that the project is slated to be completed by 2026. And yes, this does have something also to do with the EIS that's going on right now with Starship launches out of Florida. Because right now, Starship is only being launched out of Boca Chica, Texas, Starbase. SpaceX wants to launch Starship out of Cape Canaveral. In fact, that's their intention with their Artemis 3 mission and several other missions that are currently slated for Starship. According to the article, SpaceX officials hope Starship Super Heavy Launch Complex becomes operational by 2026 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And we know from the EIS studies that are going on and also that video, which I will again link above because I highly recommend it, that SpaceX wants to launch up to 120 Starship launches from Florida. Not even talking about Falcon Heavy or Falcon 9, 120 Starship launches just out of Florida is the intention of SpaceX. Even though most of the activity that SpaceX does is out of Florida, they also have their West Coast launches out of Vandenberg Space Force Station, where just yesterday they were approved to do a little bit more launches than they have been doing. The California Coastal Commission approved SpaceX to do 36 launches a year. They did 28 launches out of Vandenberg last year, and they only had an agreement with the commission to do 6 launches. So they broke that agreement with the commission from 6 to 28 in 2023. And the reason why they were allowed to do that was because these are military launches. These, SpaceX is a private company, but a lot of their contracts are Department of Defense. And so Vandenberg being a Space Force base, they can override these commissions, these limitations, and say, SpaceX has permission from us to launch more. And that was one of the reasons why the commission actually agreed to increase the launch cadence approval up to 36 launches per year, is because they thought SpaceX is going to do it anyway. The military is going to approve them to do it anyway. So we might as well add in some extra things that we want SpaceX to do along with this approval. Environmental mitigations, environmental studies. They're having worked on spaceport projects before. When it comes to politics, because a lot of it is politics, there are certain trade-offs that have nothing to do with launch. Like, for example, installing satellite internet service at Jamala Beach County Park and launching a third grade field trip program for LOPEC students. So I will put the link to one of the articles below so you can see some of the additional things that the commission wants SpaceX to do for that agreement to launch 36 times per year. But 36 times per year is not actually what SpaceX wants. According to the article that I will link below, the military expects to return within months to consider a SpaceX request to conduct 50 launches a year from Vandenberg. SpaceX has stated its intention to launch 90 times out of Vandenberg by 2026. So you can see just how much it's ramping up. SpaceX launched, I think it was 98 times, considering both East Coast and West Coast last year. And so ramping that up to just 90 times just on the West Coast, like that is a really high rate. I haven't heard any news about SpaceX increasing its landing sites out on the West Coast. I'm sure that's happening, but one piece of news that did come out about a week or two ago was that future Crew Dragons will be landing in the Pacific Ocean instead of the Atlantic Ocean. So this is seeming to take place after Crew 9. Crew 9 is the one that should be landing in February of 2025. I don't think they're changing the plan for that in the Atlantic Ocean, but every time after that, they're moving over to West Coast. And that is because of space debris. So I do have an article mostly about NASA, but also about SpaceX having an increased amount of material that they think will burn up in Earth's atmosphere, but is actually landing in random parts of the world that could cause damage in the future, that could be a liability. I will link that video above. To minimize that space debris, they have decided that they are going to land future Crew Dragons in the ocean on the West Coast so that they're not flying over so much land when they are dropping off the Dragon trunk to burn up. Exciting times ahead. News articles like this that go under the radar that talk about how much SpaceX is expanding just points out to me how much SpaceX is ahead of all of its competitors and how much they're planning to ramp up. But I don't see similar stories coming out about ULA or about Rocket Lab or Blue Origin. Like Firefly has its expansion plans, but nothing like this, nothing like SpaceX. SpaceX kind of leaves all its competition in the dust, doesn't it? But of course, with the expansion of launches, there is this ground infrastructure expansion and environmental mitigation worries. And so I'm glad that all of the proper channels are being accounted for. So all of this news is expected. And while it may slow things down just a teeny bit, it's definitely not going to stop SpaceX.